Have you guys ever watched Judge Judy? It was one of the longest running TV court shows in America. I think it was 30 years in running, and it just finished last year. I myself have to admit, I have watched Judge Judy when I have been home with a fever periodically, watching people have justice meted out upon them, and I always just sat there wondering, how did she find the plaintiff and the defendant? So it turns out there was a podcast where I got to hear all about the making and creation of this show, Judge Judy. And in the show, when people file in small claims court, the producers would get that public information, invite those people onto the show, and they would have to sign a piece of paper that said that this, whatever the result was going to be binding upon them. That was justice. Bada bing, bada boom, and we're out. How fun is that? But it turns out, after further investigation, that there's a little bit more to it. This show may be actually full of smoke and mirrors. Deception, you may even say. I know. Shocking. When asked by the producers, what rules of which state will you be following in small claims court processes? Judge Judy said, not California, not New York. The law of Judy is what I will do. When asked how does that law function, she said, common sense. Hello. But the problem is, as fun as it is for all of us to enjoy the entertainment factor of watching Judge Judy make her exciting decisions, we all think that justice was meted out. After all, what gets us hooked is the fact that we're watching a real court with a real judge having an authentic case. But again, there is an authentic case. There's a plaintiff and a defendant. But what are they trying to get after? They're trying to get a small claims paid. And who pays the small claims? Turns out to be the show Judge Judy. And who makes sure that the defendant and the plaintiff get there? Well, they get put up in a very nice hotel. And so they're incentivized to show up. And so when you start to pull away at the smoke and the mirrors, you have to ask, was justice really served? What really did happen? And I started to think, what does it mean to have justice? For all of us, if you've ever been in the court proceeding or a small claims court, it's rarely justice. Small claims, you may get a finding in support that you get money, but then you still have to go after them and get the money, and it's very difficult to get. Courts are not very fun to deal with. They're often clogged, and they take a lot of time. And yet, we value courts. When we think about where do we find justice, we often think you have to go to the court. Well, I know some of us are still wondering that today. When we think, though, further about what is it that makes Judge Judy so special, I think that one of the things that hooked us, and definitely hooked me, was the feeling that it was real. And why? There was a lot of pomp and a lot of circumstance. And there she is on the bench, and there she is telling people what the story is and laying it all out there. And isn't that what we want? We want somebody laying it out there, telling us what the story is, and getting through cases quickly and efficiently. But that's not necessarily justice. Turns out that she would get the information ahead of time, and she would often make a decision ahead of time. She wouldn't always hear the full story of the plaintiff or the defendant. Sometimes she would just let them know what her thoughts were. When we think about that, it brought me to think about the book of Deuteronomy. Of course, why would I not think about the book of Deuteronomy in connection with Judge Judy? After all, that's the Torah portion we're starting this week. A book that has a lot of pomp, a lot of circumstance, a book that kind of describes punishment that will eventually come and be meted out against you if you don't follow God's path. Eventually, The field that you wanted to produce fruit won't produce fruit. And eventually, justice may happen at God's speed, not our speed. And isn't that hard to swallow at times? But the truth is that with the idea of Walter Bagehot, and he was a British commentator on the British Constitution, that you need the dignified, the pomp and circumstance, and the efficient, the government, to run in collaboration one with the other. And he got this idea actually from the book of Samuel, where Samuel was anointed, the anointing of the king and the dignified and all that pomp and circumstances, with the efficient running of government. The problem, though, when we think about all of this, of pomp and circumstance and efficiency, and do you need all of the pomp and circumstance? Do you need to focus on the fluff? Or, can we do away with some fluff to have a more efficient system? I think what Judge Judy was attempting to say was that we can do away with a lot of the fluff and we'll get some form of justice. But upon further investigation, it was just a lot of fluff and some measure of people having some level of satisfaction. I'll give you a different example of pomp and circumstance and high drama. The rodeo clown. What's the deal with the rodeo clown, if anyone remembers? The rodeo clown comes out when something dramatic and awful has happened in the ring, because the rodeo clown wants you to focus on the pomp, the circumstances, the fun, the hoopla over here, to avoid looking at the trauma over there. So I think there really is a spot for pomp and circumstance. There really is an opportunity to celebrate that and have it be something present in our life. The problem is that if we only focus on pomp and circumstance, then the possibility is we're not going to allow justice to happen. We'll have moments of Judge Judy frequently all over the place, where we're looking at the rodeo clown, we're looking at the judge, we're excited at the efficiency of it all, but we're still not dealing with the matter at hand. We didn't get to any depth, and justice is delayed. The thing about, and the challenge with justice appearing to be delayed, is that sometimes when we look at books like Deuteronomy, they talk about the punishment. It looks like, and we want, that if somebody does something bad, that they should have a consequence right away. I have kids, and that's what I can promise you they want to have happen if their sibling is fighting with them over the one toy. Meanwhile, they have hundreds, just to be clear, in the house. But it doesn't quite work that way. Just because one set of circumstance happens, it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be punishment. And so again, we're stuck back looking and thinking about what level of justice are we truly looking for, and what level of pomp and circumstance. Again, I want to pull back to the idea of the dignified and the efficient as being two aspects and necessary. The truth is that we need the pomp and circumstance. When the president walks in the room, we want to hear "Hail to the Chief." When we go into a religious ceremony, we expect that pomp and circumstance. Otherwise, it just doesn't quite feel true, real, authentic. And I think in some regards, that's what parts of the book of Deuteronomy were getting at. I think, though, that for our world to function in a way that we're happy with it, we want to feel that justice was also occurring in an efficient way. And sometimes what we see is post hoc ergo propter hoc. Sorry, I had a Latin moment earlier today. One thing happens, therefore the other thing, meaning that just because it's cold outside, one thing it's not a causal thing. And that's the problem. Life isn't necessarily causal. Things don't just happen one thing after the other because with a causality in between. Sometimes it's just circumstantial. And again, we're back at the problem of justice delayed. But I want to turn it to your personal life super quick and recognize that there are moments when we focus all of our attention on the pomp and the circumstance, and we don't address the root issue at hand. For whatever reason, whatever our problem is, we would rather focus on cleaning the house, doing 20 million other things than addressing the real problem, the real issue. So just because it's something that we saw in Judge Judy, just because it's something that the book of Deuteronomy hints at, just because it's something that we might see in other areas of our life, like the rodeo clown or the British Constitution, I want us to try to really, in that regard, bring it at home and think about when we address issues, are we simply looking at the pomp and the circumstance? Are we focused on the rodeo clown? Or are we addressing the real issue at hand? So that hopefully we won't have justice delayed and focusing only on the entertainment value of making ourselves feel better and soothed, but we'll actually be able to address a deeper value, a deeper rooted issue, so that we can solve a problem and not have to face those same set of circumstances again. Shabbat Shalom.